I will hand it over to Professor Uma Ramakrishnan, who's spearheading WebGyan. Over to you, Uma.
Hi, everyone, and thanks for joining us today. I know we're all quite tired of these online interactions, but WebGyan, just to introduce all of you to it, is a multi-institutional effort to disseminate scientific information, scientifically validated information about COVID. And as part of WebGyan, we have a website, but also we have a series of webinars. And today we are actually in for a really interesting discussion on Made in India diagnostics and other innovations. And I will let Jeetu, Professor Satyajit introduce both Rams and Taslim who will be part of this conversation and webinar. Thank you.
Thanks, Uma. It's really great to be back on WebGyan and know that it has been rebooted. We'd gone silent for a little while, and it's really wonderful to be back hearing voices on this channel. It's actually also terrific for me to be welcoming and introducing both Rams, that's Ramaswamy Subramanian, and Taslim, that's Taslimarif Saiyed, really dear friends of mine who I've known now for longer than I would like to tell you. But okay, so very briefly, Rams is a structural biologist, completely built in Bangalore at the Indian Institute of Science. Then he sort of strides off to Uppsala, where he again conquers a few and builds a program at Uppsala, which again was a fairly envious program in structural biology. And then he was extracted to the cornfields of Iowa, where he developed one of the really top class structural biologist programs at Iowa, and also a program that built core facilities, and he was the director, in fact, of the core facilities in the University of Iowa. And then he did an about turn and came back to where he began, which is he came back to Bangalore and helped and to establish India's first stem cell institute in STEM in the neighborhood of NCBS. And also at the same time was one of the main instigators and founders of the Center for Cell and Molecular Platforms, that's CCAMP. 10 years later, his itch for travel began again, and then he decided to go back, if you will, to another set of cornfields in America, and now he is the director of the Bindley Center, which is in some ways a CCAMP of sorts, but in a university setting. Of course, and I'm sure Ram's going to drive it in many different ways, but he's also a professor at the biological sciences, building structural biology programs there anew. So that's Ram's, really accomplished. And I mean, what he did at CCAMP is what he's going to talk about with Taslim, so I'm not going to say anything about that. Taslim, on the other hand, is a neuroscientist who started out at the Max Planck Institute in Germany, and then did his postdoc in the University of California in San Francisco. And even there, he began to see how one could build a connect with life science and industry. And he worked in the QB3 at University of California at UCSF. And then, by some quirk of fate, we managed to attract Taslim back to Bangalore. And he'd already at that time, under his belt, a MBA from Wharton and an executive MBA from Wharton. And then he showed up at CCamp, and we were immediately thrilled to have found the first CEO of CCamp. And so Taslim really started out not the first CEO of CCamp, but he was in fact the first COO of CCamp. Rams was the first CEO of CCamp, along with being the dean in STEM. But Taslim, as the first COO of CCamp, was managing all the operations at CCamp, and then became the CEO, and has focused on building CCamp as both as a incubator for, and it's today's India's foremost incubator for biotech enterprises. It's also spearheaded a diagnostic program for COVID to make it indigenous. And Taslim's skills both at recognizing, what is relevant, recognizing what industry might need, and also being able to bring his deep knowledge from being an academic himself to link research and academia, also creating discovery accelerators at CCamp to take products from research into industry. I mean, all these characteristics have made CCamp what it is, and Taslim, of course, a director as well at CCamp. So, I won't go on and on because I'm sure you're here to listen to both of them discuss the topic of the day. I'll just say it's really a great pleasure to have both Taslim and Ram today.
Thanks, Jeetu. Are you done? Yeah. Thanks, Jeetu. And yeah, maybe we can go ahead and start, Taslim and Rams. Rams, I guess you'll start with some questions and then we can continue with discussion. Thank you.
Thank you, Chandrakant, for the opportunity, and Jeetu for the very kind introduction. So I thought I'll start with a statement and then start asking questions. And one of the things that the global world was fantastic for a long time, and the pandemic made us realize was that while we are still interdependent and the world is still global, building local capacities is actually very, very critical. And you can't always depend on things moving easily, people moving easily, which was kind of become the norm. And the world was taken a direction where if something was available in any corner of the world, nobody cared that it was not available because you could always get it in when you wanted. That has changed dramatically. And what happened during COVID was that ability to have local capacity to do things became very, very critical. And India has been a big part of the global play, where a lot of the research for the large diagnostics companies were done in India, but the diagnostics were made in different places, assembled in different places, and we had all kinds of interesting issues. But we'll talk about the issues of supply chain and things as we go along. But when this happened, one of the first things that is needed is somebody to realize that we need to have indigenous capabilities. And then I'm sure Taslim realized it, but when you want to kickstart something like this, and I want to start with the most important thing, which is somebody needs to fund it. So while CCamp in India has done a lot in the last year or so in indigenization of many things, I want to first ask Taslim the question of, okay, how did you get funding for all of this? Who funded you? Because that's an important thing and we need to acknowledge them in the beginning right away. So Taslim, how did you get funded? Who funded you and what happened?
Thanks, Rams, and thanks Uma, Maheen, and Chandrakant for the thought of taking this particular initiative being covered at COVID-19, and Jeetu, of course, for very kind words. I think to begin with, I just want to say that the index program, which possibly we're going to begin with today, is while anchored at CCAM, it's an effort of a few organizations together, which includes other organizations, but represents largely the Bangalore cluster, and driven extensively by a group of people who actually built it. So before I go on to say how it got funded, if I may just, Rams, to say that it's very true that the need for having enough testing get done was crucial in last March, April, May. And we all were in India while we were struggling to ensure that the more testing gets done and the more testing we can kind of trace and track people and then prevent further spread and early treatments can happen. I think that was a huge lacuna when the pandemic began in the aspect of it. Really, all of us were realized. I think as a group, I think Jitu, Professor Jitu Mayor from NCBS, LS Shashidhara, actually it was an attempt built at that level to see that how this can be responded to. And I think what was more important is a process or a concept how to respond to that. If I may say so, I think important idea here, Rams, was that while people first attempt happened in May, when the idea was that we don't have a conventional supply of testing kits from abroad. So what do we do now? Can we just put all of our manufacturers in one room and say, okay, let's start? But when we do that, and we actually attempted that under a very interesting approach called NBRIC, we realized that that was a fantastic way of putting things together and see who has what and can they talk to each other, because an RT-PCR kit has many components and one would have one, the other would have one, and then they can do it together. The challenge was twofold. The challenge was largely to say, A, there were not enough manufacturers producing kits as a whole at high quality and at scale. Both are going to be, kind of disaster if we don't do that. And what we realized is that we have to now build that capacity, build the high quality together and instill it in the community so that over time we can go to a target that we aimed at, that is 1 million tests per day. So this together as a core, as a Bangalore cluster supported by other organizations outside even Bangalore, we actually attempted to propose this idea to many efforts. And under guidance of the PHA office, we actually work with Rockefeller Foundation, who has very kindly supported this program to say, can we build capacity in India to have the around almost 1 million tests per day being produced RT-PCR, which was a gigantic task. And over time, we have come very close to that. But the good thing is that it is a long-term picture as well. It is not only short-term picture. It's not only short-term gain. It is, we believe that this is actually changing molecular diagnostics capability in India for long haul. So I think I must, on behalf of everyone who is associated with the Index program, I think we must thank Rockefeller Foundation for supporting that.
So Taslim, you mentioned in passing something very interesting, and I would like you to expand on that. And then I will ask you questions on that. I mean, you said you brought a lot of industries together to see how the sequencing is done. But at least sitting outside, the perception is still that most of the diagnostics and most of this kind of screening is still done in academics institutions in India, especially at the larger institutions. So how much of the thing is done in academia? How much is done in industry? Because Indian academia have been constantly being criticized of not participating in things of national interest. But here is a lovely example of things that have changed. And can you expand on how academia participated and had an impact? Because you touched on it in your previous thing.
I think very, very critical question. And I think, Rams, if I take a couple of minutes to possibly expand on it, the way the model worked out had a crucial role played by academia. In terms of for the testing kits to be able to build processes for industry so that they can scale up the production but keep the high quality, which was very, very critical, was actually supported early stage as well as the validation stage by the academic player. So if I begin with, we had a strong collaboration. So it was done in form of center of excellences. So one of this, like first one we actually logged in was for the components like amidites and DNTPs. And the ISA Pune actually played the role of hosting that COE there and ensuring that they can work with the reagent players there to ensure that they have early production of high quality as well as scale up production of the amidites and DNTPs happen here. You move quickly to possibly the biologics or enzymes that we talk about in the kits. ISC actually played a role in terms of ensuring the processes are built in there and then produced there. You come to the very important component of all this when the kits are being produced and needs to be validated early, not regulatorily approved, but validated on samples. InStem actually played the role of clinical COE, where the kits which were made and built slowly indigenously, one component at a time or all together, those kits were tested on clinical samples at InStem to give them that what is sensitivity, what is specificity, what needs to be done. So this know-how which was built over time was very, very important. CCMP was able to play the role of supporting on the antigen antibody interactions and how they come up with that. CCAM itself set up a role of a quality COE, so we can actually look at the reagents of a quality. Now think of it, this actually truly became a phenomenal partnership between academia, who had the long-term understanding of specific domains, and industry, who wanted to build those reagents. And this over time ensured that the high quality, high scale up production of reagents and kits happen during this period. So I think that was a phenomenal role played by different academic institutes at this point of time for this particular project for sure. There has been many other examples, but for this project for sure.
So this is a difficult question to answer, but it also bothers me, right? How are you going to sustain this? I mean, academics can't be doing service because they have a different role. How is this going to be now moved away from academia into an economic enterprise which is sustainable? That's one question that bothers me a lot, because if you don't do that, I mean, you can't have the best scientific institutes of CCMB, ISC, InStem, and NCBS beginning to play service roles. So how are you going to do this, moving of these into economically sustainable industry ideas?
No, it's interesting question, but these questions have to be brought in and for the long-term thought process. I think it's very, very important, Rams. And of course, Chitu can come in. I think he has been a part of it as much as I have been, or possibly I have been less. But just coming back at it, I think this was a call of action time for academics. This was a time when we wanted to ensure that they stand up, as you said, and deliver during for this crisis when didn't have other center of excellences, other well-oiled machinery to support on individual critical reagents. But as you rightly said, this is not the way it will go, because those experts have to go back to their own scientific journeys and so on. So one way to look at it is the models that people talk about are like catapults models, which is long term. What we do hope to do is that such a model which allows industry to utilize the expertise built, but not rely on expertise, but utilize the expertise built in academia on domain by domain basis. So there are interesting models. Let's say if you want to look at molecular diagnostics, can there be one place where industry can come in, and that place or a hub can then direct it to a different expertise and get the solutions done, not necessarily relying on one expert at this time, but any expert who can engage and so on. But this, according to me, is something going to be very important if we can sustain such an effort, so that the way the early traction has happened in terms of development of molecular diagnostics in India now, it was not happening as much. If you want to sustain and you want to be prepared for anything in future, I think such platforms should be supported, and we are working on a plan to do that as well.
Yeah, so there is a question in the chat box which is very relevant to what we were saying, and I think it's a question that is you already answered, but I'm just going to rephrase the question, which is, are academics a good fit in molecular diagnostics? where do their skill sets complement the process, and where are they not as well suited? I think you answered all the questions except the last one. The last one is that making things economically sustainable and viable is an industry issue, and they should do what academics should do what they're very good at, and the businesses guys should do. And I think,
Rams, can I jump in for a second?
Absolutely.
Yeah, I think the point that you raised about economically sustainable, this kind of an activity being economically sustainable, it has to become an industry-led program, which is supported and funded by industry if the industry finds it valuable. And if it doesn't, then it'll die a natural death. So, I mean, death after the Rockefeller funding runs out. I mean, the Rockefeller funding really, allowed us to be catalytic in this program. But academia is absolutely not going to be able to sustain this as a service model beyond, unless one converts all academics into service people. So, yeah.
So then you lose it, right? If you do that, then when the next crisis comes, academia won't be ready for it, because this was the time academia has to do what it's doing well. It was because academia was doing what it's doing well, it could come up and do this now. So if you make academia the service organization, when the next crisis comes, they won't have the tools to do what you did now. So academia, as we all agree, should not do it. So let me switch from just testing to other types of diagnostics, right? How many new startups have you seen? How many, I mean, this connects to this, right? So essentially this is an industry, so you need more startups. So Taslim, you are in the middle of all this. So how have young people responded in terms of entrepreneurship, in terms of startup? And the harder question is something that I know some of the answer for is, how easy or hard has it been for these people to actually find money to do their startups in this condition? So let's start with how have the young people responded, enthusiasm, startups, and then let's move to how easy or difficult it has been for them to find investment in this.
Yeah, so I think, I would say that the first question, I individually feel, I think there has been a phenomenal response by young entrepreneurs, and including academia. I would say that there has been some brilliant stories of collaboration. There has been some, there have been some fantastic outcomes which have come out of it. So I'll just possibly give you a couple of examples. One of the interesting things has happened, Rams, if I may say so, is that, many of the entrepreneurs or innovators who were building something closer, which could have been used in this phase, has actually finally closed the last mile for them. I think this situation or the crisis somehow pushed them all the way to the finishing line, which otherwise they were just before that. I think examples like, if I may say so, that from the perspective of in the testing kits, to some people who have done fantastic work in respiratory devices, some of the work that has happened in prevention in terms of the infection spread and so on, as well as if you go on to say one of the excellent work which is happening in terms of monitoring of remote monitoring of vitals. It is very, 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 the way they have been able to not only take their work, which was in the vicinity of COVID-19, not exactly, they didn't know COVID-19 before December 19, possibly, but because it was a vicinity, they have been able to quickly do a small pivot, small change, and then build the product and get the product out. Those have been phenomenal. I can talk about Dozy, one can talk about Koyo, one can talk about iShield, one can talk about many other testing ability likes, Omics. There are many NeoDX who have actually done very, very well. So that has been a response part of it. In terms of now, we'll talk about the funding for them or the working capital. That's a difficult one. One quick point that we need to do is that because of the Rockefeller funding, as Jitu said, we were able to support them. However, they haven't been able to raise large amount of funding. And the reason for largely for testing, they haven't been able to raise because people haven't seen this as a long-term business opportunity. So the testing businesses who are small scale haven't been able to show as a large scale businesses growth over time. The larger companies or mid-sized companies have done very well. So Huwell actually has done very well. My Lab has done very well. Many more have done very well, like Jinai and others. but the very young ones haven't been able to showcase that as a business of large scale, long-term business opportunity. And that has been there. At this pop, for this time, we have been able to connect with government-led working capitals like Technology Development Board, like Product Commercialization Unit funds, and other SID-B and others who have been able to come in and support them on that basis. So it has been a mixed thing, but the effort was to ensure that they get the working capital and grow that further. You're on mute, Rams.
So how will you sustain this? Now you got them this capital, and if they become a one-trick pony of testing only for COVID, then they have no sustainability. So primarily as a CEO of CCAMP, you must be worried about, okay, now I got them this grant from a government grant, and they're making these kits. What's your business model? How are they going to sustain? And the reason I ask is because if you think about Indian pharma, there was a lot of criticism in the first 20 years of why Indian pharma is primarily a generic game, right? But what the generic game built was large pharma companies with very good manufacturing capabilities that were internationally FDA approved. And the second thing that happened following that was important, right? And the second thing, this was all generics, right? There was no innovation from India. And the second thing that came was the set of contract research companies, which are now beginning to do some of the research in India, even though they're not doing it for themselves and they're doing it for foreign companies. But the infrastructure for doing innovative research is being established. Of course, the next logical step that I'm hoping Indian pharma will take will also now begin to take academic innovations and then make their own approaches. I mean, you can think of the same process in diagnostics. India has not had a large diagnostics thing. And this is probably the generics of diagnostics that are beginning to come up. But unless you sustain them and make them big businesses, the next steps won't happen. So what's the plan? I mean, does the government have a plan? Do you have a plan as the CEO of CCAM? And how are you going to convince investors? And how are you going to convert these one-trick ponies into diagnostic companies and not COVID diagnostic companies?
No, Rams, absolutely. I think one way to look at that is to always, even in COVID times or otherwise, when you build businesses, to not have single product plans, because idea is to have a broad aspects of it. The good thing, if I may say so, if you look back, most of them, they haven't formed a company for COVID. They had companies, they had products, they pivoted, they made a small change. So somebody was already doing UTI detection, right, to detect UTI on a small credit card based plate. And now they say, instead of doing that particular detection for that bacteria, I can do it for COVID-19. Somebody had a LAMP assay, which was doing for something else, and they have pivoted. So that's a larger part of good thing, is that they were already pursuing and had other products in market. They just made a small change in their plans and quickly turned around and built that. Now, important component for that, to be honest, in terms of sustainability for them or overall, is for us, for government, for CCAMP, and for anybody who believes that if we have a good, I would say molecular diagnostic development capabilities in India, is to have a support of sorts, either from private or government, to say that this has happened, early traction has been built, let's have a plan, 5-year plan to support it in future. How you can do that. And those have been done globally. There have been several domains where you say, this is 5-year plan for molecular diagnostics. Let's support them and see how it goes. So we are hoping, and there has been a discussion at the central level, and there have been openly discussed, that an effort like this could be supported under technology cluster support. And that could be, where they can continue to have these similar engagements with the hub and can take them forward. Now, very importantly, it is no way to say that all of these companies will succeed. I think that's a truth that we all know. I think a lot of them possibly will not see the light of the day for some of their efforts, but attempt is to ensure that the good ones, how do we support them and take it further? And doing so, if we have a change in complete paradigm shift per se, in terms of building molecular diagnostics in India, futuristically infectious biology will be really, really strong one to put forward.
So, you said a lot of things, but there is one critical piece that you missed, and I'm going to say this. From everything that you said, there isn't any evidence today that private capital has significantly flown into supporting these startups. Am I correct?
I think, yes, as I said, I think private capital hasn't moved much. You are absolutely right. Private capital hasn't moved much. However, this is many companies who have done well in this round. They actually have already gotten their valuations to the next level. They are discussing with people. And I would say that their performance during last 1 year would actually give confidence to private capital guys and invest them further. So I think I would say it hasn't happened quickly enough within 6 months to support the ecosystem, but it has happened based on performance of startups so that they can believe now that yes, you have delivered it, you have the market capture, you have the business plan, you have the inroads into the healthcare system, and now and I do see that that would happen, be it in digital health, be it in molecular diagnostics, or be it even in a respiratory device system. I think a lot of companies have grown their valuations based on the performance of last year.
So again, there are some questions on the net, and this is a question that I think probably you and Jeetu together are better to answer, which is which countries / institutes currently have the best practices and support structure for molecular diagnostics. Essentially, what they're asking is, are there institutions in India that have the best practices that support molecular diagnostics? Mahin Ali Khan is going to answer this question live. Okay.
Certainly not going to answer this question live.
No,
I'm just taking care of the questions, Ram. So since you've asked the question, then
Yeah.
So if Taslim would like to give the answer, and we will answer it live as opposed to answer it in text, is what that.
Yes, because it's an important question. So I thought since Jeetu is also here, between Jeetu and Taslim, this would be a good question to answer.
Jeetu?
Yeah, I didn't fully understand the question, Rams. You said which countries
currently have the best practices? Which institutes currently have the best practices to support structures for molecular diagnostics?
I would say that currently InStem has built a very, very good. Even though I'm partial, I'd say InStem has built an extremely good pipeline for supporting molecular diagnostics at the level of assessing the clinical samples, simply because InStem itself has been InStem and NCBS together have been a testing site. CCMB is another place which I think has played a huge role in helping industry, and it is an extremely good molecular diagnostic testing platform, providing huge effort and help to the industries that come to them. So those are the two places I would say that have been proactive in reaching out and helping industry. I would, maybe Taslim might know of others, because the index program has really worked with many such academic institutes in this effort.
So before Taslim answers, I want to do a few jargon that Jeetu threw in there. I want to expand. InStem is Institute for Stem Cell Science and Regenerative Medicine in Bangalore. CCMB is Center for Cellular and Molecular Biology, Hyderabad. So Taslim.
And CCamp is Center for Cellular and Molecular Platforms. Just on a lighter note, sorry, I had to do that. But acronyms are right. But just coming back, I think as Jeetu said, I think in India, I think this is a very interesting time where academia has worked with industry and government at the same time for development, validation, and finally even testing level in terms of molecular diagnostics. I am very thrilled because this actually will give a lot of futuristic collaborative opportunities. At the same time, if one looks at it, where has molecular diagnostics has done well? Of course, Europe, we do know several places in Europe which has done well, Israel, Japan, as well as in the US. Now, important thing in all of them was that why it has developed it. One of the crucial thing has been the high quality standards. And this, another thing is that the, consistency in terms of molecular diagnostics development, that they have been able to build it. So one of the effort, yeah, I'm just taking your question and possibly saying it's something we did, Rams, here on the ground as under the index umbrella. Well, the effort was to, set up a project management unit under index, which will drive this. And one of the key component of that is to have industry people who have the long-term experience of building something in life science reagents come and drive this. So we had people like Lalit Kishore has 15 to 20 years of experience in industry. We had somebody like Mitali has 15 to 20 years work in US pharmacopoeia in India. And we had other experts from another important part of the entire story was marketplace, which I haven't brought in for now. And that has allowed to bring the quality standards and ensure the connection with the different COEs. So I think a lot of work credit actually goes to the PMU and the way they have handled the larger effort, I would say, as well.
So we've been very talking about all the successes, but even sitting in the US, being reasonably involved with the Indian startup environment, I know there are very interesting challenges. And I'm going to throw two challenges at you. I know these are uncomfortable questions. The first question is, one of the big challenges has been regulation. Even today, our Indian regulatory agencies feel that, do you have an, is it approved by FDA? Is it approved by EU? Or is it approved in Japan? Then we will approve. They have not been able to keep pace. So how are Indian diagnostic companies, if you're going to be marketing in India, there's 1.6 billion people, you really don't need to get FDA approval. So how are we going to now get, has there been any movement and challenge and pressure or the regulatory agencies to respond? Because that seems to be a major bottleneck. And I have a few others. And I think it's one thing is to say that everything worked, people have done well, but we need to acknowledge the challenges and then see how we can move them. And how are you going to change this? Or what are we going to do? I mean, what are the challenges? Do you think it's a challenge at all in the first place?
No, I think, Rams, it wouldn't be correct to say that everything is, hunky-dory. I would begin with that. I think there are challenges on the ground, and regulatory is definitely one of the challenges. I think regulatory is critical. Regulatory is important for many reasons, so that we don't actually, anybody who has some liquid in the hand and can go in and say it's a diagnostic. So regulatory is approval for that, for everything per se. And I think I would go on to say that I think regulatory bodies globally, strive to be enabling rather than controlling. I think while with control, I think enabling component is very, very good. And I think it's a balance that a lot of industry researchers for every regulatory bodies, that we look forward to that balance between enabling and, a controlling aspect. I think in India also, I think we are working towards, we haven't reached there, but we are working towards building a relationship between regulatory bodies and otherwise, where regulatory bodies can hear out and listen to the problems and the challenges from the industry, and industry also understand the requirement from the regulatory. While we have, I would say that while we have done well in terms of early stage of RT-PCR test, we did have the challenges of, some of the kits that got delayed and so on. And I think one thing I would want to possibly say that what we want to do very quickly is to work with regulatory bodies. Index has a huge list of, testing kits, rapid testing kits, saliva-based LAMP-based testing kits, which are going to be future of testing for COVID-19, waiting for approvals as we go. And I think this, we want to work with regulatory agencies and kind of put them on the table and say, how do we go forward? There have been approaches by these companies, and we are hoping that we'll be able to work with regulatory bodies to get approval soon on that, because as we go forward, rapid testing will be the order of the day rather than RT-PCRs as for screening and many other purposes. So I think this is definitely something we can, as a system, work on and be open about and help constructively each other to build a much more enabling environment, I would say.
Yeah, yeah, I mean, you're very politically correct, right, in saying that our regulatory agencies haven't been able to respond, are not acting as enablers, rather still are sit in the British Raj mind of being controlling. I know you're politically correct. I don't need to be, so I'm just telling it the way, I'm just rephrasing what you said, right?
I deny that.
But the truth, right? At some point of time, they have to hear that they need to go from being controlling to enabling. I have a little more difficult question, right? This is something that if you have a leadership in the government which is pushing that, it'll change. But there is a slightly more cultural thing that is harder. I still get messages from people in India saying, this kit is developed in India. Should I trust this kit? And the social acceptance and the general belief that made in India is not good is an interesting idea. And so somehow we need to get over this to say today made in India kits are as good as anywhere else. So how are we going to make the cultural change among the populace to make them believe that the diagnostic kits or instrumentation that's developed in India is as good as anything that you will get from anywhere in the world? I mean, this is a cultural issue. So how, I mean, is there any communication? Is there any strategy? Is there anything that we can do to change that?
Yeah, I think you are very right. I think for many things, including medical devices or many other aspects, I think a few geographies are taken as a gold standard and much more reliable. I think we can't deny that fact. And I think as a country, India definitely needs to work towards it. And I think the only way to do it is to build a have a dedicated quest for excellence when we do things. For diagnostics per se, I think the many of our efforts which are under index, many of people, and the way we are building is that can you now aim to get it approved under US FDA or CE approval? I think the more we are able to get go through the regulatory bodies which are being seen even by our CDSCO as a guiding light for approvals. I think if our innovations can get approval from there, I think we will have more and more, in terms of confidence from a global community. I'm happy to share, Rams, that as we, for last 4 or 5 years, not only for COVID-19, it's early time for them to go and do it. There are several of our index members are getting through the process of approval at US FDA as well as at CE. At the same time, over the last 4 or 5 years, many innovations have gotten a few US FDA as well as CE mark for that. And the more we do it, the more we put ourselves on the global benchmarks and get through that. That's a very important thing. The idea is that can we push ourselves to that, or are we satisfied just being the best in our surroundings and get through the day rather? So I think that is as an important aspect, and that's a cultural change that we need to do within our ecosystem per se.
So it's a good answer, right? So and I'm going to again translate the answer into slightly something different the way I think about it. I mean, if you make anything for the bottom 5 billion people in the world, if you make something in India, it's just not for India, right? You could use it for the bottom 5 billion people in the world, even if we ignore the idea that the US, the West wants to use it, right? So there are 5 billion people who will use it, and it'll be cheaper, better, faster. And then suddenly you begin to transform, and then you begin to get a name. I'm going to now ask a couple of questions, which is I'm going to paraphrase some of the questions that are on the question answer board, because that is relevant to what we're going now. So one of the first questions is, COVID is not actually, it's going to have a long-term impact. It's not just going to be, it'll be over, but people who have had COVID are going to have long-term immune consequences for it. And this means there has to be new ideas and developments of immune diagnostic and dysfunction to measure immune dysfunction. Are there any startup companies thinking about this? Because even the current pandemic will go away, but India is going to have several million people who are going to have immune dysfunction. And how are we going to test them, monitor them? I mean, this is a challenge globally. Nobody has figured it out. So I'm asking, in India, are there initiatives to figure this out?
So, if I understood the question correctly, Rams, you are saying that the possible fallouts from post COVID that are happening, and what are we looking at in terms of are there any startups looking to already looking at that? I think as we go on to build, understand the implications of the COVID at large in community, I think possibly when we need to understand what happens. That goes through the genome and serosurveillance that we'll be able to do and understand that. But at the same time, I think I would say that a few companies are already looking in terms of not only human health wise, but how the behavior patterns and the requirements in the healthcare systems will change post-COVID. There'll be a completely different way healthcare delivery is going to happen, more so in countries like India in next 10 years. And there are opportunities which are going to emerge beyond our imagination today, be it like digital health. Digital health was already on a fast track. COVID has actually brought it on the fastest lane ever in terms of adoption. It had two challenges. One challenge was the behavioral aspects, that how the health systems take time to adopt to new things. The second challenge was the reassurance that the medical health worker is important despite of the technology. Right now, the most demand digital health components because of the COVID is right now from the medical fraternity and in building them for that. So I think there are opportunities like that which are emerging. While one looks at coming back to the testing related question, I would say that there are already few companies which are looking to see if we are to look at the different, not only look at what you would call it as the pathogen testing or molecular diagnostics. Can we do now other diagnostics like cytokines and so on? Can we have panels? Can we have other capabilities which can be built on? Because to be honest, a month and a half back, we actually almost saw a crisis on the cytokine panels and other things as well. So people are looking to have those innovations. They're early. I won't be able to cite many of those, but these are the indications I have seen on the ground.
I have one long question, but I'm going to ask a quick, short question to you. The question is, fast forward 2 years from now, how many of these, in terms of exit of these companies that have all mushroomed, how many do you think will exit and be acquired by larger Indian companies? How many do you think will be acquired by the multinationals?
It'll be number throwing rounds. I don't.
No. What I'm heading to is there an appetite for the larger Indian companies to acquire Indian companies? That has not been the case. Most of the exits that I have seen in India, in my 10 years there and since there, have all been exits to multinationals who seem to believe in Indian companies. So is that going to change because of COVID?
I think so. So one thing that has happened over the last 1 year is that you would have noticed there are some big names who have actually entered into molecular diagnostics as we speak. And those names have been bigger groups, but they haven't been traditionally in this business. So I think for their long-term plan, which they do see that this is a long-term plan, I think for them, they will look to absorb and procure the technologies from outside. It could be under acquisition of companies or the licensing. So I think there's 3-4 players who have come in and committed a long haul. They have not announced for an opportunity of a few crores. It's a long-term opportunity they have done. So I think that is a good sign even for testing. If I talk about right now, I think the winners of this race will be the prime targets for these big companies like Tata's and others who have come in now to be taken up over time. Reliance, Tata's, many others actually have come in the molecular diagnostics, and that goes on to say that they will actually build it. So that's a small, aspect. But at the same time, there are other companies which I'm just using it so that there are other companies who have done well, and they would have a good validation in terms of clinical, settings, not only for their product, but as a penetration and a purchase from like respiratory devices of Koyos and something like Dozy, I strongly feel that they are going to be prime candidates to be picked up in next 2 years, I would say, and that would be phenomenal in terms of young innovations built out of India being picked up globally, possibly.
I have a long question. We have 8 more minutes, and this is a question again from the Q&A as well as a question in the back of my mind, and I have to ask this because Uma's there, Jitu is there. What is going to be the impact of developing and dealing with the crisis of COVID in Indian academia's mindset about how they think about research? Has it changed? Will it change? And will they begin to focus on more Indian problems and still focus on Alzheimer's disease and neurodegenerative, which are West's problems? Are they going to are they going to be happy in their skins that they don't have to convince a white guy that they can do things in India? Is this going to change? This is a question for all of you. I mean, I think Uma and Jitu will also have to say, is Indian academia's mindset to become focused on India? Will it happen?
I think Jitu and Uma can take it.
Jitu, you can start. Go next.
Go ahead, Uma. I'll follow.
Okay. Rams, I'm the wrong person to ask that question because I'm an Indophile, and I've always, I love working on problems in India, and my hope is that by doing so, we can make them global examples and opportunities to, develop technologies, understand things in a local context, but broadly relevant. That might sound like empty words, but I think that definitely this particular, the last 1.5 years will certainly affect my science trajectory. Let's see how much of that plays out, but yeah, I think that's all I have to say.
Rams, I think very important question raised by you. And I have two points to make. One, I should say, for the past several years now, there has been a shift in the emphasis of at least of the focus of science on problems that are coming and emanating from our neighborhood. I mean, Uma is sort of in some ways one example of how she's, in fact, her science is embedded in the ecosystems of India. But, beyond that, for example, some of the programs that we developed or we have developed at NCBS and INSTEM together with NIMHANS about the brain program on looking at creating a bioresource for the global community on cells and tissue from individuals who carry, long-term neurological problems and long-term psychiatric problems, multi-generational. I mean, that's a unique resource that has been created locally. So I think there has been a recognition that there are many unique aspects to what we can do in India from a biomedical perspective. I should also say that it is something about having a confidence in what you can do that allows you to create the local connect. And unless that confidence emerges within Indian science, the Indian Science Institutes, I don't know what will happen. COVID, on the other hand, has certainly provided provided a glimpse of what is possible, right? You can take your science that you've been doing and turn it around and address a local problem. So at least the way is now available. And whether Indian academia, bites in a large scale remains to be seen. But I'm hopeful that this will be a turning point. It'll have to be in some ways because I think the funding is also going to be directed in those directions. So long answer to your question, but I think it deserves some exemplars before one makes sort of platitudes of saying that, yes, it will happen.
We have 3 minutes, and there's a question on YouTube. This is to Taslim. Do you think novel techniques will find a market when for COVID tests like the Feluda test? Can they be popularized and will they catch up?
Absolutely. I think, there is always space for new techniques and new abilities. And I think people using CRISPR-Cas and others, I think there's a strong, I would say, market opportunity for them. The only thing they have to do for now is that when they do it, they have to not only match the gold standard, that is like RT-PCR, but do better than that, either in sensitivity, specificity, or cost, or ease of use. It has to be better than the best in the market today. So while it is there, you have to do that. And I think, that's how the innovations actually take next steps. So I think absolutely there's a place for that. And hopefully we will be able to, as a country, as a regulatory and all that, we actually provide them that space once they prove themselves. A quick answer, Rams.
No, that's okay. Taslim, we have 2 more minutes. So do you want to take a 45 second to summarize, and then I will summarize, and then we'll hit over time. Any last word?
Nothing much to summarize, Rams. I think it's a good opportunity to share some of our work. It has been a collective work. I think a lot of organizations have actually worked on it. The core committee for Index, that is Jitu, Shashi, and myself, but also institutes like INSTEM, ICER, Pune, CCMB, all ISC, many others have done, and the PMU have done. I think one thing I would like to say is that really, after working on it, we are really hopeful that there would be a shift in terms of development of new diagnostics in India. That's the key. While it is a short-term gain for now by doing such program, and thanks to Rockefeller Foundation for the support, I sincerely hope there is a long-term way of doing it. And I think I would believe, Rams, that there is a space for such hubs for many other domains. A hub which can actually connect the expertise in academia, build the know-how, build the processes, which can be taken, not necessarily taking all the energy away from academia, but there is a place for that for several domains. And I hope, with some government support, this can be built as well. But we'll see how it goes.
Okay, we are at 9 o'clock mark. So I'm just going to summarize in 2 sentences and say, I think this was a crisis. And I'm very pleased that as an observer sitting outside and being a participant in the side game, India has taken this crisis and made it into an interesting opportunity. And I think there have been many, many successes and the lessons that learned. And I think that's the whole idea of crisis becoming new opportunities, and India stood up to it. And I just wish that we would be able to sustain it and then translate the learnings of being able to manage a crisis is probably the best way for the coming together of academia, translation, industry, and a local innovation enterprise that can change the world. I think that's a very good summary. And I think India has shown it can do it. Now the question is, will we sustain it and use it in every other domain, as you said, Taslim? Good. Thank you, Taslim. And any Uma or Chandrakant or Maheen, any last words, or you're done?
No, thanks everyone for joining us, and hopefully we can continue these conversations. And thanks, Rams and Taslim, for your time. Thanks, Jitu, as well.
Thank you all. Bye-bye.
Thank you so much. Just please remember, on the 8th of July, we have our next WebGyan session. So please follow our social media, and we will put up the registration details for that soon. Thank you very much, and I'm closing the call.